Alright, so we're going to go through your notes for Personality Analysis 2. We're going to put together everything you need for your final, so go ahead and have this printed out so you can take your notes. We'll just go right through it. Feel free to fast forward or rewind as needed. Alright, number one. What does the phrase genius is precise mean? So, right in the very beginning of this course, we talked about some lessons about strength and genius and being excellent, and one of the things they talked about is that potential for greatness in any one individual is often very precisely defined, right? And so if you remember, we talked about examples of taking an executive who excelled in one company and you put them in another company, they don't always excel, right? That what made them great in one setting doesn't necessarily equate to another setting. Or, for example, you could take someone who's excellent athletically in football, and you put them over in basketball, another athletic sport, and they may not do as well. Or you put them from football over into baseball. They're athletic sports, but it doesn't mean that they're going to thrive in it just because they're an athlete, that their giftedness is specific to the context. And so basically what that means is that for every individual, there are specific areas where you have the potential to be excellent, right? And so and that's what makes it so important to understand the way that God has gifted you and what God is calling you into, so that you can maximize your potential and not spend your life doing things where you didn't really have a very high ceiling in, right? Because it's very easy, if you're not careful, to fall into just whatever career path presents itself without taking time to understand what did God create you to do, right? So genius is precise means that you can't have genius in everything, that God has given you potential in a few things that He wants you to excel in, right? Okay. Number two. The more specifically you can articulate your strength area, the more easily you will be able to produce excellence in your production. Right? The more specifically you can articulate your strength area, the more easily you will be able to produce excellence in your production, right? In your calling. Okay. And then, one other thing, just to go back to number one, I would say that just because genius is precise, the caveat there is that we can never limit what God could do in somebody's life, right? So just because maybe you are not necessarily gifted to do it right off the bat doesn't mean that God couldn't take you and allow you to do something, right? So we don't want to put a limit on what God can do, but we just want to have it as a basic principle. God has created you and gifted you with the things that He wants you to do, with the talents or the potential to fulfill your calling. Of course, with everything, sometimes God takes the things that are weak in the eyes of man and uses them for His glory, to show that it was Him through the whole thing. So we can't ever limit what God could do based on our own strengths and abilities. But just as a general rule, we're generally hardwired to be good at a few things, and it's important for us to find out what those are, because often the clue to what God wants us to do is found in the strengths that He embedded within us. Alright, number three. What does it mean that strengths application must be intentional? Alright, so basically what we mean there is that just because you have a talent or skill doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to become excellent unless you work at it, right? That in your inborn strengths, you may do it at a reasonable level of efficiency or excellence, without even trying. I mean, like if I'm excellent at public speaking and somebody else is excellent uh, at mechanics or whatever, if the person who's excellent at mechanics uh, watches me do mechanics, right? He may, and he never tries, like he doesn't apply himself at all to mechanics. He's just got a natural skill at mechanics. If me and him both do mechanics and he's never applied himself, we may be at about the same level, right? But because he's got the skill, if he applied himself, because he's got these natural inborn skills that God's given him in mechanics, if he applied himself, he could be way better than I could be, and then the reverse is true for me. If I never applied myself to public speaking, and then this mechanic and I both spoke in public, we might be about the same. I might be a little better than him naturally, and just like in mechanics, he may be a little better than me naturally. But the real difference comes when I start to apply myself in my area of strength. Then I separate from him in that, because and he would separate from me in his area of strength, right? So strength application must be intentional. You can't just rely on the fact that there is an inborn talent in you and think that that's enough. There's always more to be done, right? It has to be intentionally developed. Which leads to number 4. Why is it important to push yourself in the area of your strengths? The reason why is because this is the area where you want to apply most of your own kind of self-imposed pressure to be excellent. If you push yourself in the area of your strength, you have a lot more potential. You have a higher ceiling there. If you push yourself in other areas, you won't see the same return. And so you want to make sure that if you're going to push yourself and you're going to demand excellence of yourself, that it should be primarily focused on your areas of strength, right? Right. And obviously that doesn't include morality and integrity and following the word. Those things you push yourself in because that's the type of person that you're to be. And then on the other hand, you have your calling and your giftedness, the things that you're going to do. And so that's what I mean by that. So push yourself in terms of your calling. You want to really push yourself in areas of strength. Number 5, strengths are the raw ingredients of production. That it's hard to have production without strength, right? That ultimately, if you're going to produce in an area, it's because you had strength. Now, having strength, just like we said in the last couple of questions, is not enough. You need to be pushing yourself in your area of strength. But if there is no strength there, then you're going to have a hard time having much production there either. Strengths are the raw ingredients of production, but strengths by themselves don't produce anything unless you are pushing yourself in that area of strength. All right, number 6. Explain in your own words the 4 categories of the values-based framework. All right, so this is one of the ones I want you to do on your own. You're going to go back in and look at this. I'll remind you what these are just briefly here, but in order to get a full answer, you're going to have to go back in and look at these. It was, we did the chart with the quadrants, right? And so one of them was hierarchy, which is your administrative kind of stuff, organization, company, hierarchy charts. This is the president, the vice president, the director. That there's a clear structure and administration in place. Then there was the clan quadrant, which dealt with your organization's strengths of keeping a family atmosphere, the relational side of your company. Do people work well together? Do people feel like they're part of a family when they come to work? The third quadrant was the adhocracy. This dealt with innovation. Can people come up with ideas? Is the company fluid in terms of bringing new ideas to light quickly, or do new ideas get squished, right? There's some companies where they don't want new ideas, right? And so, but then there's some companies like an Apple that want. Apple, 3M, some of these companies that innovation is what they do, right? So they're very strong in that area. So adhocracy deals with innovation. And then the fourth one was market, right? So that's how well do you reach your marketplace. That could be advertising, promotion, sales. It could be research, understanding your marketplace, connecting with potential customers, reconnecting with existing customers, all of those things. How do you interact with the marketplace? So those are the 4 elements of the values-based framework. Number 7, list and describe your top 3 strengths from the StrengthsFinder leadership textbook. Alright, so obviously you have needed your text to do this. This is just to reinforce what are your strengths as a leader. Okay, so there is, there's not a single right answer for this. It's going to depend on what your results were from the textbook. And so basically what I'm wanting is what were your top 3 strengths when you took the StrengthsFinder Leadership Edition, right? Okay, so I want you to write the strength and give me a brief synopsis of it. Doesn't have to be real long, but just something brief so that I know that you are aware of what that strength means, right? Number 8, why does having a talent not necessarily equate to success or excellence? Okay, so basically what I'm looking for there is that, let me pull this up here, is that what you want is having a development process in place, right? So why does having a talent not necessarily equate to success or excellence? It's because unless that talent, and we've touched on this in a few of the other ones, but unless that talent is developed, it cannot produce excellence. That's really what I'm looking for. Unless the talent is developed, it cannot produce excellence. Number 9, development must first begin with awareness. Okay? Development must first begin with awareness. What that means is, this is why, in fact, that we do the testing, right? If you ever wonder why I give you some of these tests and all that kind of stuff, that there's a reason to that. It's not just for curiosity's sake. People that take them just for curiosity's sake miss the point. It's not just for, so you have, a quick little thing and say, oh, okay, yeah, that is me, and move on. It's that we understand the principle that development begins with awareness. You can't develop a strength that you have not been made aware of, right? And so you take the tests, the various types of tests, and through these you gain a little more insight into what types of strengths you have. And once you have that, then you can begin development, right? So the testing is just the beginning, right? And that just makes you aware of certain things. Then the next step is to begin to say, okay, I need to develop what this test has just made me aware of. And if I develop what the test made me aware of, then I can begin to start operating in excellence, right? So it's not just, a lot of people take the test and they say, oh, so that's what I'm good at, and then they leave it at that. But the test is really designed to tell you where your potential lies, right? It's not to say that you've already achieved that. It shows you where your potential is. Then you take those areas that it pointed out and you start applying extra work and extra focus into maximizing those things. Then you begin to operate in excellence. So understand what the purpose of the tests are, is to create awareness so that you can develop the right things, right? You don't want to spend your time developing something that you're not naturally gifted in, right? Unless the Holy Spirit's calling you specifically to do that. Apart from that, you want to focus your time on things that you're gifted in, right? Alright, so development must first begin with awareness. Number 10, what is the significance of the statement, most strengths are rooted in 2 or more talents? Basically what that means is that you often have several talents and things that you're good at, and it's the synergy of different talents that creates a strength, right? So, for instance, I'll just use myself in the most humble of ways. If somebody was to have, I just use myself because it's easier. So I've got, say, maybe a talent of speaking, right? Okay, still working on it, but that's an area where I would say, okay, that's something that God's placed in me to do, right? So got a talent there. Another talent is that I love to read, right? And that reading doesn't bother me. I could read quite a bit. And retain a lot of it. And so my teaching is a combination of those 2 strengths, right? And probably a few others, but the strength of speaking, right? And the strength of reading and retaining information. And so I put those 2 strengths, those 2 talents together, and it creates a strength And so that's really what I want you to see, is that most of your strengths are combinations of various talents. And so if you can understand some of the talents that are affecting your strength, then you can go back in and maximize those and understand the components of your strength are often multiple talents working together to create an area of strength in your life. All right, number 11. Explain the significance of the statement, expectation can be just as powerful of an ingredient in success as potential. If you remember, I told you a story about how there were some teachers that were told that their students were excellent, and during all of that, they made excellent grades. But then, come to find out, there was no excellent students in the group. It was just random people selected. And so, but the teachers who thought they were teaching excellent students treated them differently, right? And then the students reacted differently, right? So the students ended up making really high grades. And what it does is it shows the power of expectation. That if you expect something to succeed, you approach it in a different manner than if you expect it not to succeed. And so a lot of your potential, a lot of your success depends on how you approach it. Do you approach it with faith? That's why the Bible says faith is required to please the Lord, right? That without faith, you're not going to be able to do this the right way. You're not going to approach situations with the right attitude if you don't have faith. If you don't expect for things to turn out in a good way and in a productive and fruitful and excellent way, then you approach them differently. And so expectation is a key ingredient of the end product. Right? You can't just approach life any old way and think that it's going to work out the same regardless of your attitude. The attitude you bring into situations affects the outcome. Right? Okay. Number 12. Explain how the life of David is an example of the pursuit of new identities. All right, so this is one of the ones I taught right in the beginning, but I just barely kind of glanced over it, but I think it's an important thought. That in life, we have different strengths and different talents and different abilities, but those strengths can be manifest in different roles, right? And this is huge. So think about the example I just gave of some of my strengths. We'll use speaking and reading and retaining information. All right. So that really comes together. I can speak and retain information. That comes together very well in the role of teacher. But I've also used that same gifting set of being able to speak and retain information in a role as a youth pastor. Right. Earlier in my life, I did youth pastoring. Right. And God used that, and it took on a totally different form than what my teaching does when I'm in the classroom, right? And I believe that there are other roles down the road. I think that someone, not saying that I'll do this, but just looking at different potentials, and who knows, I might, it'd probably be better for me if I did follow some of these potential things, but someone that went into politics, right? Being able to speak and to be able to read and retain information would help somebody who's running for office. It would help somebody who's running a corporation. It would help someone who goes into foreign affairs or political things in that realm. It would help some, there's a lot of different roles that those two combinations of talents could be effective in, is what I want you to see, is that being able to speak and being able to retain information can be applied and that strength could be used in a variety of roles. Right? So it doesn't have to be just teacher that I'm doing now, or it didn't have to be just youth pastoring, or it doesn't have to be just politics later in life. I mean, there's different things that these strengths can be applied into. And so the reason that I pulled the life of David is that he went through all manner of different new identities, right? Same gifting, same strength, right? Same personality, same person, but he experienced different identities, different roles throughout the course of his life. So he was a shepherd, a warrior, a general, chief of a wandering band of nomad warriors. then he went and became king of Judah. Then he was king of an expanded empire of all Israel. There were all kinds of different things. He was, in some ways, a worshiper. As he put together the Psalms, he was a lover in many ways. He was a economist in many ways. If you look at what he set aside for the production of the temple, Solomon was able to do much of what he did, in part because of Solomon's wisdom, but initially a lot of the success was due to what David had set aside. At least the resources that they used, much of them in the beginning were David's. Now Solomon expanded it, right? And Solomon took what David did to the next level, clearly. But if you go back in and read what David had set aside, so he was an economist. He was, all kinds of different things, different roles that David took on, but it was the same person. And so what I want you to see, how that life of David, how he went from shepherd to a warrior, to a general under Saul, then to, chief of his own group, right? So now he was the only leader, but they were wandering nomads. And then he became king of Judah, then he became king of Israel, and then he had all of these other roles and things that he did. So what I want you to think about in your own life is, what are the new identities still that you will put on, right? Sometimes we get so used to the one that we're in currently that it's hard for us to think about identifying ourselves, right? But it's important to remember that your strengths that you have would be strengths in a variety of different roles. And that whenever God requires it, He may put you into a different role, but you may use the same strengths that made you successful somewhere else. Now God uses them in a different way, but it could be the same underlying talent, just a different role, right? So David's faith in God, his courage, his willingness to worship, his boldness, and his being led by the Spirit of God, all of those caused him to be successful in each role that he was in. And so he took on 10 or 12 different roles in his life and was successful in all of them, but the underlying talent and the underlying personality was the same across each of those. He grew and adapted and applied himself, and so he was not the same person as a shepherd that he was as a king, but the underlying talents were there already, right? Okay. Number 13, we cannot solve problems with the same thinking that created them. That was Einstein's quote. We cannot solve problems with the same thinking that created them. Number 14, multitasking is a myth. What the brain actually does is alternate tasking. Your brain really struggles to do two of the same thing at one time. If you're using the same part of your brain to do two different things, it really struggles, right? So what people are actually doing is not multitasking, doing two things at once. It is alternate tasking, which is moving quickly from one thing to the next. But what they found is with alternate tasking, you actually end up slowing down your productivity, even though it feels like you're getting a lot more done because you're moving back and forth. The end result is that you end up doing less sometimes, and it really has an effect, they say, on your long-term memory, because your brain is always in flight or flight mode, so to speak, when you're multitasking, because it's on high alert, moving back and forth between so many things, that the capacity for long-term memory while you're doing that really diminishes and decreases, because the pathways for long-term memory are often diminished when your body's in high alert, right? Okay. And then finally, number 15, in your own words, describe each of the 4 categories in the Myers-Briggs personality test. So this is when you have to go back in on your own and put in, but remember the 4 categories, right? So the first one was introvert versus extrovert. So I want you to explain both sides of that in your own words and explain to me that category and what each side means, right? And then the next one was intuitive versus sensing. The third category was thinking versus feeling. then the fourth category was perceiving versus judging, right? And so I want you to go through and be able to explain in your own words the differences between each of those in each category, right? So go give me each of the four categories, tell me what's on either extreme, and kind of explain what each one means. So introvert and extrovert, you would explain what an introvert is. You'd explain what what an extrovert, what an introvert is, and that's probably about it, right? So you would say it's extrovert and introvert is this category, and extrovert is such and such, and introvert is such and such, and that's sufficient for the answer. As long as you tell me both words, the one on either extreme, so introvert and extrovert, and then I want at least a description of what an introvert is and a description of what an extrovert is in your answer, right? And if you do that for each of them, you'll be fine. Okay? All right, so go back in, make sure you study some of the ones that you do on your own. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email.